With its flowing stream, along with the narrow passages and chambers studded with stalactites, the Cascade Cave is a caver's dream. However, at the same time, it can also turn into your worst nightmare in a second.
Head up! Head up! Hands out! Still breathing, okay? Hands up to the side!
December 5, 2015 was like any other day for Munoz and his friends as they explored Cascade Cave on Vancouver Island. Exploring such narrow passages was nothing new for one friend who was an experienced caver as well as a paramedic. As the friend made their way about 340 feet underground, past a waterfall named Double Trouble, they went to Bastard's Crawl, a narrow passageway with a heavy stream of water passing through it. Thinking that they would keep going, they squeezed through the tight space one by one as the water rushed over them. And it was at this point that things took a turn for the worse.
Breathing, okay? Hands up to the side! Speed up! Come towards me! Come this way!
Jason Story had only gone caving 4 times, and the Cascade Cave was his most challenging outing yet. It was about a mile long and 338 feet deep. The Cascade Cave is full of turns and barely passable tight squeezes, otherwise known as a claustrophobe's nightmare. It's risky enough that the entry is blocked by a locked metal door to keep people, and the key can be obtained only after everyone in the caving party signs a waiver. Jason Story heard the rain, however he was not worried as he prepared for a day of caving with 5 friends in a distant spot about 80 miles northwest of his home in Duncan, Canada. He was dressed for the wet weather, and for just about any other explorer, a t-shirt, 2 sweatshirts, as well as a pair of overalls, neoprene socks, a water-resistant jacket, as well as rubber boots. Under his arm, he proudly carried his new helmet and headlamp. Jason, Andrew, and 2 more friends, Adam Shepard, also a paramedic, and Zach Zariski, a chef and volunteer firefighter, drove through the heavy rain to the parking lot of a log cabin candy store in Port Alberni, where they got the key to that metal door. There, they were to meet up with Matt Watson and Arthur. About 45 minutes in, Adam said he couldn't go any farther, as his back, which was injured a few weeks back, was twinging. The constant hunching over had taken its toll. Matt escorted him to the entrance to let him out. He closed and locked it again, rejoining his 4 waiting friends. For the next 90 minutes, they took their time as they crawled, strode, and slid through the Cascade Cave's 2 very different environments. Either pipeline passages barely big enough to fit grown men that were like the nave of a church, massive but not so overwhelming.
That's fucking awful!
Wherever they go, the friends try to stay within 100 feet from the first person to the last, passing through the chambers between the more challenging crawls and climbs. Once they emerged from Bastard's Crawl, they approached the top of a waterfall called Double Trouble. The group set up their ropes to rappel 50 feet. Boots and gloved hands clawed for leverage on the slippery ledges. The water gushed on the rock formation and landed at the bottom in a spray of bubbles. There's a reason this cave is known as Cascade. Beyond the Double Trouble, they stopped for a quick break to eat. Andrew fired up the jet boil to make food, and after their 20-minute lunch, the group continued exploring, sliding and crawling their way down toward the cave's end, which was less than a quarter mile away. However, they got only 300 feet when Zach begins shivering violently.
Get your fucking there, okay? Dude, fucking Jake, fucking look at me, okay?
Even though the temperature hadn't changed, the cold inside the cave can hit unexpectedly. The group decided to turn back. They started to retrace their route. First, Matt goes, then Arthur, then Zach, Jason, and then Andrew. And the sound of rushing water grew louder. There was more mud than there was on the way down before, and it stuck heavily to their heels. They were climbing up, so it was taking much longer. The sound of the water had now turned into a roar.
And I want you to put your feet up, put your feet on me, okay?
What had been before a gushing but the manageable flow was now an angry white froth. But how could this happen so quickly? Matt hooked his rope attached to his harness at the top of Double Trouble and started hauling himself up. The journey wasn't long, maybe 50 feet, but it was tough, precise work, hoisting one leg to find a tiny, then a gloved hand, then the other leg. Once he climbed to the top, he threw the rope down and Arthur followed suit, then Jason. Then at the top, Jason got on his stomach to pull himself up the incline of Bastard's Crawl. The cold water, deeper than before, swooshed into his face as he powers through it. Finally emerging through the opening, he couldn't see the two cavers ahead of him and get nervous about waiting at the top, as there was room for one person at a time. He then carefully crab-walked about 15 feet when the streaming water suddenly swept him onto his back and submerged him. He felt the pressures of more water building up behind him, and if he didn't get out of the crawl fast, then the relentless surge of water would have thrown him over Double Trouble and onto the rocks below. But he couldn't move as his boot was stuck between two rock shelves. Zach, who was following Jason up, was on the Double Trouble. Lying on his back with the water rushing all over him, he tried to call for help, but he gasped frantically for air. It has been about 5 minutes. It feels like forever. He then shouted down to Andrew that Jason was in trouble. Andrew quickly clambered up behind Zach and went to the bottom of the crawl. He could barely see his friend's face because of all the water. Jason was only a couple of feet away, but he was in such an uncertain position and in such a tight space, Andrew couldn't just pull him out. Jason's gloved hands emerged from the water, then his wet face. He gulped air as if he had hiccups. He told his friend that his leg was stuck. At first, Jason doesn't recognize his voice as it comes out slurred and slow as if he'd suffered a stroke. He then tried to dislodge his boot, which didn't work. 20 minutes after being stuck, Jason emerged from Bastard's Crawl with his eyes shut and gasping. Andrew settled him on narrow ledge inches above the water. Andrew comforted his friend by telling him he was okay and tried to get him out with the help of his other friends. Andrew feared that Jason was turning hypothermic, so cold that he had stopped shivering. He wrapped his friend in the mylar blanket and fired up the jet boil. Andrew warmed Jason by pouring hot water down his clothes, and after some time, Jason's color starts returning to normal. When they reached the top of the crawl, there were barely 4 inches of air left between the water and the ceiling, and there was not enough to keep their heads up to breathe. Jason spotted a ledge, and even though the wall is at an awkward 45-degree angle, there is enough room for them. Andrew perched in front of Jason to take the spray from the water. Jason's legs uncomfortably braced against a ledge on the opposite side of the waterfall. The water rises almost to the ledge, and its sheer force and fury cause a wind to come up. Saving the batteries in their headlamps, they sat in the dark, which made them forget what small space they were in. Jason tried to force his breathing to slow down and move through his diaphragm and up to the tip of his skull. And trying to warm his face, he pulled his sweatshirt up over his nose. Andrew silently recited a mantra based on a passage from the science fiction novel Dune. At that time, there was no sign of rescuers. The two men had no idea whether or not their friends made it out. Then, after an hour, the water level went down enough that the two could keep their heads above water and try to escape. Stiff from sitting in one position for about 12 hours, they slowly unfolded their bodies. Jason screamed in pain. A muscle in his body was strained, but he was still determined not to let it stop him. Getting on all fours and through Bastard's Crawl, nothing else matters but that. Still, Jason cried out every time he moved a leg, and Andrew tried his best to motivate him. Over the next 90 minutes, the two friends made their way toward the entrance, sometimes in chest-high water. Now, in the passage high enough for them to walk upright, Jason saw something glimmer in the distance, and they were out of the haunted cave. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, take a deep dive into the like and subscribe buttons. Let us know what you thought of it in the comments. See you again soon in another video, if you dare.